Hello everyone, my name is Anders, and in celebration of this year's release of Avengers Infinity War, I am reviewing all previous MCU movies. This time, I am reviewing Spider-Man Homecoming. So, without any further ado, let's get right into it. Spider-Man Homecoming was released in 2017, a few months after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. If you would have told me in 2012, when the first Avengers came out, and also the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, that Disney Marvel would be able to broker a deal with Sony and they could incorporate Spider-Man in the MCU, I'd say you were crazy. However, in 2014, Sony released The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And boy, did that one bomb. Now, it still was a profitable movie. Independent filmmakers would kill for such a profit. But the movie got panned by critics and performed well under Sony's expectations at the box office. And I actually like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's the first Amazing Spider-Man I wasn't a fan of. But I was on the minority on that, and people hated The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Sony didn't know what to do with the Amazing Spider-Man franchise anymore. Their plans for completing a trilogy and a Sinister Six spin-off movie were being doubted by the fans, and the people lost their faith in Sony being able to handle the Spider-Man character. Fortunately for the fans, they were able to strike a deal with Marvel Studios and Spider-Man was rebooted, and Spider-Man Homecoming was the first solo, and I use solo very lightly, Spider-Man film of the MCU. The reason I use solo very lightly is because it features Iron Man as a supporting character. But more on that later. It's going to be hard not to compare Spider-Man Homecoming to the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. The trilogy I grew up with and love. It's also going to be hard not to compare it with The Amazing Spider-Man, just short of one movie to be a trilogy either. So, I'd rather review this movie on its own merits. This movie is directed by John Watts, the director of the Kevin Bacon classic Cop Car, and stars Tom Holland as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark / Iron Man, Michael Keaton as Adrian Toomes / The Vulture, Bokeem Woodbine as Herman Schultz / The Second Shocker, Marissa Tomei as May Parker, and Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan. Now let's talk about the good stuff. First of all, no origin story. Hooray! No more seeing Uncle Ben die! We've had 3 cinematic versions of Spider-Man in 10 years. To give you some reference, Hugh Jackman played Wolverine for 17 years. I was so happy when Marvel Studios announced that they wouldn't do the origin story all over again. I like that they went with a younger Spider-Man who's still in high school, instead of him graduating halfway through his first movie. All the other storylines with Peter, when he's more older, you can tackle that later. But the high school storylines, you can only do that for a limited amount of time. So once again, Marvel Studios makes the right call on that one. I also really like Tom Holland's performance as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, although I thought Tobey Maguire was very serviceable in the role of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And I really like Andrew Garfield's performance. I must say, I think Tom Holland's the best Spider-Man or slash Peter Parker we've ever had. A concern I had with this movie is that it kind of was promoted as Iron Man 4, where you could see Tony Stark struggle with taking on this new kid with superpowers. But I think that was just a marketing trick to make sure everybody knows that Spider-Man is part of the MCU now. There was never an Iron Man and Spider-Man team-up fight in this movie. We never fought a battle together. Despite a shot that's only in the trailers, that suggests otherwise. Iron Man was used very well in this movie as kind of Peter's father figure. And we see that Tony Stark sees Peter as the kind of son he never had. But Iron Man was only in the movie to teach Peter some morals or to congratulate him. You can feel his presence throughout the movie, but he doesn't overshadow the movie one bit. While you could say Captain America Civil War was also kind of an Iron Man movie, you cannot say this about Spider-Man Homecoming. It's definitely a Spider-Man movie and a Spider-Man movie alone. Let's talk about the villain. This was the part of the movie I was the most concerned about. Marvel Studios, unfortunately, has a track record of not having great villains. And Spider-Man is known for a very interesting rogues gallery, one that even matches Batman's. So naturally, you want those villains done correctly and the right way. It was a step in the right direction to cast Michael Keaton, but we've seen talented actors like Mads Mikkelsen being wasted too. Then Marvel opted for the Vulture as the main villain. Actually one of the more lamer ones in Spider-Man's rogues gallery. But the filmmakers succeeded in making the Vulture actually pretty darn cool. Although I think he's not as good as a villain as Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, but you understand what's driving the Vulture and you sympathize with him too. Furthermore, this is the only universally loved Spider-Man movie that has more than one villain. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 both had multiple villains and both were hated by critics and fans alike, stating that those movies were too convoluted due to the number of villains featured in those movies. Well, Spider-Man Homecoming proves that statement wrong. You can have a kick-ass Spider-Man movie with multiple villains. It all depends on how you use them. So aside from the Vulture, this movie also features the Shocker and the Tinkerer. I always thought the Shocker was served best as a henchman to the main villain, one that could fend off Spider-Man for a few moments so that the real villain could show up later. And this movie did exactly that, and it worked greatly. Lastly, the Tinkerer was played perfectly as being the Q figure to the Shocker and the Vulture. The one making their tag, that is. Now, on to the bad. Although it is kind of the point of the movie, I don't like how incompetent Spider-Man is in this movie. He does nothing else than making a mess of things, and then he has to fix the mistakes he has made. Every disaster that happened throughout this movie is because Spider-Man did something that Tony Stark or Happy Hogan forbade him to do. But yes, in the end, he's able to undo all of the mistakes he's made, and it's also kind of the point of the movie. He's still young, and he still has much to learn before he becomes good at being a hero. Actually, a gripe you could have about the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy is that Peter becomes way too competent at being Spider-Man in a very short amount of time. Lastly, this movie doesn't go any further than a really well-made summer blockbuster. It's no Captain America Civil War, where you can see the deep emotional and complex struggle the characters go through. No, it's not like that. But nor was that the intent of this movie. It's a fun, light-hearted movie that's fun for the whole family and a worthy addition to the Spider-Man movies. Rating time. My ratings ranked from worst to best are as follows: shit, bad, meh, good, and awesome. And I give Spider-Man Homecoming a good. I almost gave this movie an awesome, but I'm a little bit biased because Spider-Man's my favorite superhero character of all time. But I think this movie is just not as good as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy yet. But Spider-Man Homecoming still is a very good Spider-Man movie and just a good movie in general. And I'm very interested to see whether the MCU Spider-Man trilogy can surpass the Sam Raimi trilogy. But either way, Spider-Man Homecoming is already much better than The Amazing Spider-Man, just short of one movie to be a trilogy. See you next time, where I will be reviewing Thor Ragnarok.